One of the most influential writers in my life, especially my early life growing up, was Ursula K. Le Guin, our local hero. A lot of us, imagine, love her work. And there was a story of hers, a short story that I was introduced to in high school that I've gone back to over and over in my life. It's called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. It begins with this scene of a parade. It's a glorious parade coming down a city that is gleaming, sparkling with joy. She talks about joy over and over again, this hallmark of this city, Omelas, that all the people are filled with joy, but not in a saccharine, happy kind of a way, in a deep down, they know their lives are good kind of a way. And everything seems to kind of work out all right in this city. She gives a lot of flexibility. She kind of says, imagine it however you want. It's kind of a feminist, socialist utopia. And then she catches herself and says, maybe you can't believe this city is real. Does this sound too good to be true? So she says, well, let me tell you the secret of what's going on. Down in a basement in this beautiful, perfect city, locked in a little closet, there's a child who is living in the most abject poverty, absolute filth, neglect, aloneness, this horrible. She just goes on and on about just how awful it is, the living conditions of this child. And the truth, the secret truth of the city is that everybody knows it. Everybody enjoying this joyful, beautiful place, well-functioning, utopian city knows that it all relies on the suffering of this one child hidden away in the basement. In fact, it's the coming-of-age ritual of the city. People are taught about this, know about it growing up, and then sometime when they're old enough, they're brought down to come face to face, to see the reality of the suffering that the joy of this city depends upon. And everyone, of course, reacts with big feelings. People are angry, rageful. People are heartbroken and upset. People are depressed. But in months or years, they come to terms with it, the people of Omelas. They make their peace with this reality. Because they're told, they know that if any of them were to go and help this child, to do something to bring them out of this situation, it would break the magic. The whole joy of the city would fall apart. And so couldn't they really in any way justify ruining the lives of everyone else in the city in order to take care of this one child? But then she says, at the very end of the story, there are those who, when they meet this child, or occasionally, decades later in life, realize there is another choice, and they walk away. She says they don't know what's out there. Nobody knows that there even is something out there to walk to out beyond the city of Omelas. But she says, as the last line of the story, they seem to know where they're going, those who walk away from Omelas. It's a parable that stuck with me, I think, because of the way it speaks to this absolute dilemma of our interconnectedness. And there's nothing that brings that dilemma close to home like the suffering of children. And so I think about this at children's birthday parties. You might have heard me say, I think that all of the great theological questions are right there at children's birthday parties. It was Henry's birthday party yesterday, and luckily it was a minimal suffering of children birthday party. But it happens. I remember one in particular when Henry was in kindergarten. And it was just coming back from the pandemic. Everybody was really nervous to meet each other. It was midway through kindergarten year, and we were parents whose kids had been together for quite a while, had never met, and we were all getting together at a park, and gray skies, kind of a windy day. I remember the wind blowing the wood chips into the hummus, and it was a bad omen from the start, I guess. And so as we're nervously getting to know each other, we're all alerted, thus parents sitting around by the screaming cries of discontent from the children across the way. And so we all rush over with our anxious parent bodies, and we all get on close to the kids, who we see one little girl, blonde little girl, is laying on the ground crying. It turns out that this bigger boy with a kind of a mohawk brown flop of hair has just shoved her to the ground, but it turns out he did that because she, along with most of the rest of them, were teasing him, and he's got tears streaking his face too. And this flock of anxious parents is descending, trying to tend to this messy web of interrelated connectedness. I asked my child about it. Once I'm clear, my child was not part of the teasing. Well, then I say, so what could you do, when something like this is happening? And in what was obviously a well-rehearsed answer, an answer that had been taught very specifically by the teachers at his school, he replies, "Walk away." And it doesn't quite live up to the imagining I'd had of lead my community into a new, bold, covenantal way of loving one another through challenging conflict. But he was 6 years old, and walk away was probably more appropriate. But the tears didn't end there. That was just the beginning. Pretty soon, those helium-filled balloons, all the rituals of the day happened. All of the rituals, those ways that the yellow thread is woven among us to keep us holding our connections and the dilemmas they bring. So we have the ritual of the balloons, the helium balloon, the slip knot that I've never really been able to figure out how to tie. It slips right off of one of the kids, and the balloon goes floating up into that gusty wind, and the tears start going. But then her sister, she comes and brings over her balloon and gives it to her. And immediately it's like the sun has come out, the tears go away, and she gives back a piece of chocolate from you I receive, to you I give. Mending is happening, but before you know it, the great big birthday balloon, the one that led us to find the right spot, the sparkling mylar unicorn in the sky, well, that one is being given to the birthday kid. And Dad somehow managed to fumble it in the transition from the fence to the kid's wrist, and off goes the bright, sparkling unicorn. And birthday kid is just sobbing on the ground while all of us try and talk about, the unicorn going off into the sky to join its, unicorn friends. And before you know it, we've created this whole theology, this mythology of where unicorns go, and Mars gets it. I don't know why we get to Mars, but the unicorn is going to join all the other unicorns on Mars. And birthday kid is not having any of it, sobbing on the ground. And my kid comes, and they were best friends at the time. He brings and hands them his balloon. And that helps, but the story does end with that balloon floating away too. It really was a miserable, miserable birthday party. we are connected with one another and with all that is around us in ways beyond what we can imagine. The truth of that interdependence, the truth of that blue layer, that first layer that says this is the nature of reality, this is the basis of our theology. That truth is not just a warm and fuzzy knowing we're connected, it is also the truth that we inevitably hurt one another, are impacted by the world around us, and in turn impact it. And so we develop these layers, these promises, these ways of being, these expectations, these covenants, these rules, these systems, this yellow layer of connectedness to try and tend to the fragility of our web. And we inherit some of those rituals and practices and expectations and promises that are good and healthy for us, and we inherit others that are broken and that are leaving some less connected, that are tending to some relationships and not to others. And then each of us has agency here, has the power, this red last thread around, to make choices that impact our promises and the web of reality underneath. Interdependence is the nature of reality, and love is its ethical calling on each of our lives to respond. This is our Unitarian Universalist understanding. We talk often about spiritual growth. We say every week in our mission that we are here to inspire spiritual growth, but I have a hunch that we don't actually have any idea what that means. I don't know. Do you? Do you know what spiritual growth is? I'm trying to figure it out. I think one hallmark of it, of spiritual maturity, is the recognition, the ability to take responsibility for one's own choices in how they impact the web. To get out of that younger, more immature paradigm of controlling and being controlled, and into one of a self-responsibility for one's inevitable impact on all we're connected to. The problem is it's so much easier to just stay in that reactive control and be controlled, seek vengeance, get back at them way, than to feel the pain that would lead us into a more mature responsibility for our impacts. That system of blame and punishment that would teach us that's what accountability means. That accountability is about blame and punishment, pulls us away from the spiritual maturity that's necessary to deal with the complexity of our interrelatedness and what is maybe an ever-growing complexity in our times. There's a marriage and relationship therapist you might know, Esther Perel, who has some wisdom about this. She says, love rests on two pillars: surrender and autonomy. Our need for togetherness exists alongside our need for separateness. One doesn't exist without the other. With too much distance, there can be no connection, but too much merging eradicates the separateness of two distinct individuals, then there's nothing more to transcend, no bridge to walk on, no one to visit on the other side, no internal world to enter. When people become fused, when two become one, connection can no longer happen. There's no one to connect with. Therefore, separateness is a precondition for connection. So to answer this call of love, this ethical imperative of how we relate to our interconnectedness, requires us to trust those spaces in between, requires us to back up and get that distance, maybe like unicorns living on Mars, to see from a further vantage point our interrelatedness in a way that acknowledges both our connection and our separation. And, she's talking about romantic relationships, of course, but I think we can apply that wisdom to all of our relationships, and in fact, to our call to make love real in public. Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. And so if we were going to take this seriously and imagine, what does it mean to relate to the systems of our world in a way that creates more justice? It might begin with the capacity to be caring deeply of oneself. Because that separateness, that ability to care and tend to the ground of one's own being, is what enables us to relate to the web of interconnectedness with love. It's the place where every one of us, no matter what quality or quantity of power we have in that red layer, every one of us starts with our power to care for our own being, our own self, our own emotional reality, to take responsibility and accountability for how we impact the web. That means that sometimes when we are dealing with the spaces in between, our love looks more like a fight. There was an interview with Keanu Reeves and Drew Barrymore, and Drew Barrymore is fending him off, saying, no, I'm a lover, not a fighter, and Keanu Reeves says, no, I don't accept that, because if I'm a lover, I have to be a fighter. And she says, what do you mean? And he says, if I love something, and he gets a nice deep voice and makes it, really sexy, but he says, if you love something, then you have to fight for it. And I do think that this time we live in will require fighting for things. One of my favorite contemporary authors is Nora Jamieson. And she talks about the ones who stay and fight as a response to Le Guin's story. She writes this homage to the ones who walk away from Omelas, and she imagines a similarly utopian city, but in the end she says that instead of there being a child whose suffering is what the whole thing rests on, instead these social workers, she calls them, are there to protect the city from the influence of ideas that would undermine the whole project. And so when somebody gets an idea like they're better than other people, their differences set them apart in a way that elevates their worth and denigrates that of others, in Jamison's story, the social workers come and quickly and humanely execute them. Because that idea is so toxic, so infectious, so evil, that the only proper response is to exile it and keep it from infecting their city. She ends with the image of the daughter of this man who'd been infected with these ideas, who they'd just killed, these social workers. And the social workers see that the daughter has also been infected with these ideas, and they are not sure what to do. They look at one another and decide the only path forward for her will be to become a social worker as well. So don't walk away, she says. The child needs you too, don't you see? You also have to fight for her, now that you know she exists. Or walking away is meaningless. Here's my hand. Take it, please. She makes it stark, so painfully brutal, but the question really is one that all of us have to face. How will you use your power to impact the web of our promises, the reality of our connectedness? What is love's call on you? Let us love in public. Let us love in public by showing up and connecting with others across difference. Let us love in public by standing up for the possibility of disagreement without polarization. Let us love in public by surrendering to the world as it actually is. Surrendering while gripping fiercely to an autonomy that tells us things don't have to be this way. Let us love in public by making choices that reflect the truth that every soul matters. Let us love in public by celebrating and accepting and appreciating our differences. Let us love in public, and let us love in private, making out of struggle joy. May it be so, and amen.